quantum physics offers some interesting insights into all of this. One of the things that we haven't discussed, and we might as well hit it now since you bring all this up, is we haven't asked ourselves in this weekend the question, what is the source of the strange information revealed by the psychedelics? In other words, this alien beauty that I've been ranting about, where does it come from? If you are an evolutionary thinker, you believe that anything that survived this long in biological organization must make some contribution to the business of survival, because nature is extremely parsimonious with metabolic energy, and you just can't squander energy on things which don't contribute to the propagation of the genome. Well, so then why are these vast amounts of apparently alien and not useful or applicable information, why is it available to us at all? Why do we need to know about these dimensions that make no contribution to our survival? Isn't this a proof that evolution is not functioning as advertised? Well, here's how my thinking has been moving along these lines. There is a phenomenon called non-locality, and it has been the bad child of quantum physics for over 70 years. And in order to understand what I'm about to say, we have to back up a little bit. In the 1920s, when quantum theory was formulated, there were several contenders among which the scientific community had to choose. And these contenders were like cousins of each other. Each theory was a little different from the other one. And each theory contained assumptions or produced predictions that were a little different from the other competitors. Now, we have grown up with the idea, we have grown up under the umbrella of what's called the Heisenberg-Bohr model of the atom. And the Heisenberg-Bohr model has built into it this peculiar idea called the Heisenberg uncertainty principle. And there are few things that have been so ballyhooed and written about by non-scientists as the Heisenberg uncertainty principle. And it's been claimed that it was an enormous bridge between the hard sciences and the spiritual world, and that it somehow proved that there was a materialist basis for thinking about or believing in a spiritual universe. And here's what the Heisenberg uncertainty principle is talking about. It's saying that here you have a particle. It has properties like velocity and position. In other words, it is somewhere and it is moving at some speed to somewhere else. And the Heisenberg uncertainty principle tells you that as you gain information about the position of the particle, you lose information about its velocity. And as you gain information about its velocity, you lose certain information about its location. And so you are always, your intellectual enterprises must make room for this uncertainty, that it's built into nature, that it cannot be gotten rid of. And so this gives great cover for certain spiritual positions. Well, it turns out, as always, we peasants were given a simplified version of what was actually going on. It turns out that when they sat down at the Council of Copenhagen to lay down the dogma of quantum physics, that there were two theories on the table. And mathematically, they were identical twins. In other words, they produced the same numbers, they produced the same predictions out to the same number of decimal points. And so, and yet they began from different assumptions. And so the question was, which of these theories shall we choose? Well, there was something wrong with each one of them. What was wrong with the Heisenberg model, or I don't know, wrong, but let's call it disturbing to the rational mind. What was disturbing to the rational mind about the Heisenberg model was this uncertainty principle. Why can't you know the velocity and the position out to 10 decimal points? Why does one mitigate the other? And the answer was, well, just because. It's the Heisenberg uncertainty principle, that's why. The other model, about which very few of us ever heard until recently, because once it was decided it was not a contender, it was forgotten, was developed by David Bohm. And it delivered the same numbers, and it had no uncertainty principle in it. When you do the Bohm method, you find out with infinite accuracy both position and velocity. Well, then why was it not chosen? Answer, it had something built into it that could not be stripped out of it without destroying it, that was so weird and so counterintuitive and so woo-woo that everybody looking at the two theories said, go with Heisenberg. This other thing produces ghosts. It produces craziness. Well, what was the craziness that it produced? Built into it was the prediction that there would be, as a consequence of it, a phenomenon in the universe called non-locality. And the classic example of non-locality is this. You have two particles, and they have qualities like spin, charge, angular momentum, this sort of thing. Bohm's theory said that any two particles which have ever been associated with each other, no matter how far in the past, and no matter how much ordinary Newtonian distance separates these particles, they are linked by magic through this domain of non-local connection, such that if you can affect one of them by, for example, flipping its magnetic moment or changing its charge or something like that, its ancient companion will react to this instantly. Though they may now be on opposite sides of the universe, they maintain this non-local connection for all time. And the reason this is troubling is because it is the faith of physics that there was something called the Big Bang. That there was a moment in the history of the universe when all particles were squeezed down into a space smaller than the diameter of a proton. And so that would tell you then that if non-locality is real, then every single particle in the universe is connected to every single other particle in the universe, and affecting a particle here will affect all other particles. Well, in physics, people do what are called Gedanken experiments, just good German for thought experiments. This is when you can't afford the apparatus or you don't know how to build it, you imagine these crazy experiments. And you know probably from studying relativity all this talk about trains passing each other and messages being sent. Well, these are Gedanken experimenting to try and help untangle the mysteries of relativity. And people said, well, we should do, a Gedanken experiment would be to mingle two particles and then separate them with magnetic fields and then twist the magnetic field or the spin or charge or something of one of them and then measure the other one and then see what gives. And people said, well, she's right, but how can this be done? How would these particles be isolated from the rest of the universe? And yak, a million reasons why this couldn't be done. Well, it turns out a few years ago, a guy named John Bell figured out how to actually do this, how to go beyond the Gedanken experiment to a workbench test of, this is also called the Einstein-Podolsky-Rosen effect, but you probably don't need to worry about that. And he did the experiment, and lo and behold, it is so. It is so. It is robust. It can be repeated. It can be mathematically described. Hundreds of laboratories around the world have repeated this experiment. This is the most woo-woo thing you can possibly imagine, and it actually happens. Well, what does it mean then? Well, it means, in my simple way of thinking, it means all information is cotangent. It means that if there's a race of beings 1,000,000 trillion light years away, they are here. They are now in the Bell non-local connection space. And then people rushed forward and they said, well, you don't understand. Quantum physics can't be really downloaded into ordinary English. This seems to be a miracle in English, but if you would but learn the language of mathematical description that we use, you would see that this, while interesting, is not miraculous, and no information can be transduced in this way. Because, see, immediately people said, well, can't we then flip a molecule here and its companion molecule around Zeneble-Ganubi prime will flip at the same rate, and by modulating our flips, can't we create a kind of Morse code telegraphic communication instantaneous? See, that's the other thing. This is faster than light. You can cross the universe in a moment with this stuff. Would this not support this? And then people said, well, no, information theory and this and thermodynamics and this razor and that razor, and so it can't be. But these voices have lately grown more silent as this is explored and looked at. Well, I say, recall from the question about the synaptic cleft, how I pointed out that though the human brain seems gross and macrophysical, that the moving of a single atom on a drug molecule can elicit a fantastically different experience. Well, it turns out we are not as far from the quantum mechanical realm as we suppose ourselves to be. Perfect example, I don't know whatever happened to these things. They seem to have been an artifact of my childhood. But when I was a kid and you got a Gilbert chemistry set, the AAA one that cost your parents $50, it came with this little thing called a spinthariscope. Why was it called that? I don't know. A spinthariscope. And what a spinthariscope was basically a little metal tube and with a little phosphorus screen in the back of it, and then a needle had been dipped in radium, the same sort of radium that used to make watch dials glow, and this needle would stick up about a ½ inch in front of this phosphorus screen, and then the spinthariscope had a lens in the other end. And what you would do, having tired of chewing wintergreen mints and frightening your friends with that trick. Same closet. This is where the medical examinations went on as well. This is closet science for sure. You would go with your friends back into the closet, and you would wait 10 minutes until your eyes dark adapted, and then you would look into this tube, and after a few minutes, you would see what looked like the twinkling of stars. The twinkling of stars. The explanation for this phenomenon is that radioactive particles being given off by the decay of the radium are striking the phosphorus screen, hurtling through the outer quantum shells of these atoms of phosphorus, and because there is this exclusion principle that says when an orbit is occupied, particles are lifted to the next orbit out, the phosphorus atoms would kick out photons, a photon. And so when you look through the spinthariscope, what you're seeing are actually single photons. And the human eye, apparently one rod or one cone, is able to respond to this light quanta, and you 145-pound sweating primate creature, are actually looking down into the quantum mechanical level. Well, so if our eyes can see single photons, and if the movement of a single atom on a drug molecule can change it from active to inactive, I would like to suggest that what we call the imagination is in fact our perception of Bell non-local space, that we are embedded in this non-local information field. And interestingly enough, this gives some aid and comfort to the more naive schools of ufology, because what I've always objected to about alien stories is that the aliens are so human. You know, binocular vision, an interest in proctology. They're always messing around with our technologies and this and that and the other thing. They're too human to be credible. I mean, I believe the alien will be so alien that the major challenge will be to know that it's in front of you. Well, but suppose we are immersed in this Bell non-local information field. Well, then you can only recognize in that field, it contains all the information in the cosmos, all of its past, all of its present, perhaps all of its future. But you can only recognize what is familiar. You know, put a Chevrolet in front of you, you recognize it. Put a Sviangic Nihuact in front of you, and you have no idea what this is. So, in a way, what our consciousness does is it enters into the Bell non-local information field, and it recognizes what it can recognize, and what it can't recognize it defines as noise and completely screens out. So in fact, these strange promptings, these revelations, all of this, it could be nothing more than that the imagination is transducing Bell non-local information. Now, there's hope. This opens up a speculative possibility that I think is very interesting. People say, well, you mean then that the aliens can never be here? That when we contact them in the mind, we are contacting them though they may be galaxies and galaxies removed? And the answer is yes. They will never come in ships of titanium to interfere with our politics and stuff like that, because the universe is vast in space and time, and the number of possible destinations unimaginably huge, and the motivation for coming to our island backwater is hard to conceive. But there's a tiny crack here through which we might be able to push an entire world. And here's what it is. all that can move then, if this model of this space is right, all that can be extracted from it is information. But remember last night or today or sometime I said the universe is not made of space and time and matter and energy and light. Those are lower dimensional slices of what the universe is made of. What the universe is made of is information. And so it seems to me, if you want to contact the aliens big time, not you having a private connection, but our world making a place for the aliens among us, the way to do it is to take our most creative and imaginative people and tell them, we want you to build a virtual reality, and we want you to make it as alien as possible. And when you're not coding, we want you to take psychedelic drugs and observe your own imagination's unfoldment. And people will think they are building an alien-like environment. But if in fact the imagination is the domain of non-local information, then at some point we will realize this is the real thing. We have landed the aliens. We have landed them on the net, and they did not come through the skies of Earth or from the future. They came out of our imagination. Our imagination is the doorway to the alien intrusion. And that's why these poor souls who live in trailer courts are tormented in the way that they are. Now, I'm very aware as I run through this that one of the world's great quantum physicists is sitting in the room. And I feel more and more nervous as I build this card house higher and higher. What do you think? Does it parse? It's possible. It's barely possible. It may be impossible. Without embarrassing John, this is John Sheliak, who, if you are fans of the time wave, you know he pulled my chestnuts from the fire just as the English positivists were about to crucify me on the hill, and produced the new mathematical formulation of the time wave that we call time wave 1. But for a living, John models nuclear fusion processes on supercomputers, and he has his chops. So, but I think this is why I say our future lies in the imagination. And to the degree that we can understand the non-local Bell information, we can pull technologies, mythologies, information of all sorts out of it. And perhaps I'm not describing anything new at all. You know, that essentially what I'm offering here is a kind of cleaned up 2001 scenario. The monolith in that, you recall the Stanley Kubrick film, the monolith there was a physical thing. But I believe that nervous systems, when they pass a certain boundary of complexity, begin to transduce this non-local Bell information. And it gives you ideas. You know, what would it be like if we smashed rocks and used the edges, the sharp edges, to cut up material? What would it be like if we did this or this? Shamans have always acted out of inspiration. And strangely enough, so have scientists. You know, the myth of science is that people gather information, look for patterns, move incrementally forward, and so on. This is what they tell the peasantry, that they're very careful thinkers that never make leaps. They always just move one step beyond what is known. Read a book like Thomas Kuhn's book, The Structure of Scientific Revolutions. And what you discover there is that The great breakthroughs in science are always revelations. This is how it worked for Einstein. This is how it worked for Kekule, the guy who conceived of the benzene ring and threw open the doors to organic chemistry. It came to him in a dream. And Einstein said, that he would pass into these trance-like states and then he would see this. Indeed, the entire enterprise of modern science was a mystical revelation. This is a story they don't trot out at the AAAS meetings, let me tell you. But as a matter of fact, in the fall of 1621, a young Frenchman who had decided that he should go wenching and touring around Europe, he had joined a French army that had been raised to go to Prague to put down a political situation that we call the Winter King. It was when Frederick the Elector became emperor of the Holy Roman Empire and actually dreamed of an alchemical reformation of European society. But when the Habsburgs got wind of what he had in mind, they decided to crush this incipient revolt, and they gathered this army and did so. And then this army was retreating back across southern Germany. And I believe it was right around this time of year, it was in late August of 1621, the army pitched camp near the little town of Ulm. Some of you have probably been through there on the train. There's a nice little cathedral there. And Ulm's claim to fame, and this is a kind of synchronistic weirdness that has nothing to do with my story, but Ulm is the birthplace of Albert Einstein. He would be born there some centuries later. But this particular August, this army put camp there, and that night, after hitting the bars and brothels of this town with his buddies, he records this in his diary, this young Frenchman went back to the barracks and fell asleep, and he had a dream. And in the dream, an angel appeared to him, and the angel said, the conquest of nature is to be achieved through measurement and number. And he awoke, and he said, that's it. And the compass of my life is set. I see it clearly. This was René Descartes. This was the founder of modern scientific materialism. Modern scientific materialism is the revelation of an archangel. And all science since has proceeded essentially upon these inspirational grounds. So I believe that in this domain, shamanism and scientific creativity and artistic creativity, it's a seamless phenomenon, and it all works its way out of the Bell non-local domain. That is the universal source of creativity, what in previous ages might have been called God's mind, because all events, all inventions, all arts, all sciences, all forms of magic, not on this planet, but throughout this cosmos, are contained in that space. And so this is the very space, the very source that psychedelics amplify, so that instead of just, a thin, spaghetti thin line in there, you spread the bandwidth, you open the channel, and you begin to get bigger pictures, clearer pictures, more frequent pictures. And so the taming of fire, the invention of language, the discovery of the astronomical movements of the solar system, the wheel, all mechanical invention, all comes out of the imagination, what Blake called the divine imagination. And if that is true, then for us to not use these psychedelics and to not build our social systems and our sciences around psychedelics as tools of exploration is for us to like play the game with half a deck.